Good morning, everybody. I'm Aileen Cardet from Univision 23, and for me, it's a privilege to be here today with all of you and with this legend, Katharine Hamnett. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let me read a little bit about her so you can understand her amazing life. Katharine is an English designer who became known for her oversized block letter t-shirts in the 80s after they were worn by iconic pop bands. She made a comeback to the fashion scene in 2017 with a well-timed political activism. The label Ageless unisex designs have materials, manufacturing, and packaging that are ethically and responsibly sourced, including dyes that are protective of human health and the environment. Hamnett views her fashion as a way to transmit a powerful message, like choose life, peace, worldwide nuclear ban now, use a condom, are only a few examples of her worldviews and convictions. She has been an activist against sweatshops labor, lobbying for more conscious, responsible practices in the industry, as the manufacturing industry and the agricultural aspect as well. So please, let's give a big round of applause to Katharine.
Thank you very much. It's very kind. I suppose what I should really say is that we did T-shirts kind of later. I actually ran a very successful brand in the 1980s. We set up in 1979. We didn't have any outside investors, which meant I was the boss, so I could do whatever I liked. But we grew very successful very soon. We're selling in, well, we weren't just making T-shirts, we were making like normal clothes. And we were soon selling in 700 shops, 40 countries, like the best shops in the world. And we're getting huge amount of publicity. We're doing fashion shows in Paris, Tokyo, New York, London. And we were just getting huge coverage. And we were getting very, very copied on our clothing. So I thought, well, what could I do that I'd be happy if people copied it? And I thought, well, it would be, huge messages on T-shirts, on social and environmental issues that needed addressing. So it's funny because fashion kind of disappears. Nobody actually remembers that we were kind of dressing everybody. And the thing that's remained is the T-shirts. And in 1989, we were on a wave. It was crazy. I was living like kind of the fashion designer's dream, concording everywhere. As you said, fashion shows, parties in Paris people talked about for 15 years. And I thought, well, I've always been interested in Buddhism because I think it's like Christianity, but it's a really kind of even more practical. It says things like anger is hell, best thing to do with resentment is forget it. And they said, well, of course, the way to be happy is you have to live a good life. And sort of what's a good life? And they sort of define it into the eightfold path. It's right action, it's right speaking, it's right meditation, and it's earning your livelihood without harming any living things. So we initiated some research internally because it was just going so well and we were doubling turnover every season. I was still my own boss, which is rare and amazing. And of course, the results came back that it was the clothing industry is a complete living nightmare. I mean, the first thing that came up was tens of thousands of farmers dying of accidental pesticide poisoning in cotton agriculture, long-term contamination of the aquifer, which is the water supply, rivers, seas, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers.
It's one of the 5 more toxic industries. It's really terrible.
It's unbelievable. It's like 12% of world agriculture, and only 1% of it is organic. It uses something like 25% of world pesticides, and pesticides are killing the planet. Without a doubt. Bees, fish, name it,
You've been
birds.
for decades in the industry. Is it evolving a little bit? Are people relating to the industry becoming more conscious?
Well, yeah, I mean, people are. I mean, I think the consumers are, which is great, but I think the industry and even academia is already dragging behind. I mean, 10 years ago, St. Martin's, which is probably like the most famous fashion school in the world, said, oh, don't bother with sustainability because it's a waste of time, which is unfucking believable that they could be so behind. And the industry is getting better, and the young designers are great because they're already trying. But then you've got the big brands like Wyatt Burberry's using organic cotton for all their raincoats. I mean, it's outrageous. I sat next to the sustainability person from H&M, and I just said, you're doing great. You've got your whole kind of sustainability collection, but why isn't all your cotton organic if you care? And she said, oh, we can't get any. I said, well, so I actually emailed her an address of, 3 very large enterprises, which I said, you tell the farmers then that you need it, in 5 years you need this much, and they'll plant it for you. They'll plant it season by season, and farmers will convert. So get up your ass. I mean, I think that there's a lot of hot air. We were just at Copenhagen, and, it's a lot of hot air. I actually said to them, shouldn't be there. Because, the cost of our carbon emissions isn't actually offset by the good that we're actually doing. So why am I here? You can say, well, I hope that the cost of my carbon will be offset by the good things that happen after this conference. There's too many certification bodies. You've got the Caring Group, you've got all these foundations, da-da-da-da-da. There's a very good, anybody interested should read, there's a magazine, British magazine called Eco Textile News, which I recommend. You can get it online. Get it. But I had met John Mowbray, the editor, the other day, and he said, we should just unify all these certification bodies, and it should be run by the UN, because, there's this and that, and a lot of them are just hot air.
It makes sense.
Or they're marketing organizations. They're just marketing organizations for products, which ultimately, with people like LVMH, the Louis Vuitton, the bag for life, is actually covered in PVC. It's PVC-coated cotton. PVC is one of the most toxic materials used in the clothing industry. It releases dioxins into the atmosphere in its manufacture, in its disposal. And the dioxins are like the world's #1 pathogen. They're worse than nicotine. They're worse than cigarettes. So give us a break.
Your t-shirt says no more fashion victims. What can we do as consumers when we go and buy our clothes? How can we become an activist so we can change the industry?
Well, it's the planet is the fashion victim. I mean, of the clothing industry. There's fashion victims right all down the line. There's the cotton farmers, there's the garmenters in the developing world, who are paid less than a living wage. Farmers dying of starvation. I think, big picture, what I'm proposing in Europe, and I think it applies to America, is that we need new legislation. Everything is down to legislation. The deindustrialization of the developing world was due to legislation that allowed China into the World Trade Organization without addressing its artificially deflated currency. And I see that they're in trouble now with America putting up sanctions, so they're deflating their currency even cheaper, so that it becomes cheaper to buy Chinese stuff, and they defeat the tariffs. What I'm suggesting in Europe is we have a law which only allows goods into our developed, and this could apply to America, into our economic bloc, which are made to the same standards outside as mandatory inside. And that means we have higher environmental laws in America. I mean, the EPA, when it was good, was shit. Now it's just working for the other side. Ours is called REACH. And we have a larger population than America. We have 500 million people living in Europe, who are the richest consumer bloc in the world. We've just been annexed to a free trade agreement with Japan, so it's 670 million. If only goods were only allowed in that were made to the same standards outside as inside, you'd immediately stop horrendous pollution all over the planet, and the outsourced countries like China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, you can go on and on, because they wouldn't be able to sell it to our countries unless it complied with our laws. And it would be great if America adopted the same thing. And so I think, ultimately we can ask for organic cotton, we can ask for sustainably made clothing, we can ask for, vegan leather, we can watch out for viscose because it's toxic, bamboo is greenwash, but ultimately it's political. And it's, the only thing that changes politicians' behaviour is something that threatens their ability to get re-elected. Is it Rosie Perez, the fabulous Puerto Rican actress? She was interviewed by Michael Moore on Democracy Now!, which is another, democracynow.org, you've got to watch it, because there's other things on there we'll come back to in a second. And she said, you need to target your elected representative. We need it to actually become politically engaged. It's not enough just to be a consumer, because we're just being kind of steamrolled out of existence Nobody's addressing anything. Our governments are out of control. Our elected representatives aren't representing us. So we actually have to contact our elected representatives, tell them that unless they represent our views, we're not voting them for next time. Rosie Perez says this. She says, target your congressman. She said, Trump won't fold, but he will fold. Target your elected representative. Tell them you want this, that, and the other. Let's get the world that we want. It's the only way to do it.
But don't you think also consumerism plays a big role, that maybe not in the Europe, I think people buy less. They have better quality, but here in the United States,
we have the same
probably,
shit as you do. We have the same rubbish.
45 pairs of shoes, and everybody buys and buys and buys and buys. Do you think we have to change that mentality as well?
Well, I think if we have my law, clothes will get more expensive, so we'll be forced to buy less to start off with. But I mean, I always like to be devil's advocate. If all fast fashion, for instance, was made out of organic cotton, natural fibres, are miraculous for climate change because they pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they keep it on the ground. So if all fast fashion T-shirts were made in organic cotton, the more we bought, the better. Because we would be actually encouraging farmers to plant more organic cotton, we'd improve soil quality, we'd help biodiversity. So, there's other sides of it. I mean, how many clothes do you need? I mean, don't buy anything stupid. I think the trick is, I always used to do this when I was at college, is go out shopping but without any money. Try on everything that you want, but of course you can't buy it. You've got no cards, nothing, no credit. And then if you can remember next morning, what you really wanted to buy, which would be sort of 90% will have disappeared, okay, you can go and buy it. Just be a bit more thoughtful about how you shop. And buy sustainably. Don't buy PVC. Don't buy viscose unless it's lensing process, unless it's tencel. Ask for organic cotton. Write your favourite brand. Say you want sustainably produced merchandise, or else you're not buying it again until they can tell you that it is. This kind of thing. But ultimately, it's what you do in political engagement that will actually affect the planet. Because, we're making clothes all over the world. We're wearing them all over the world. 1 in 6 of the world population is working in fashion. It's unbelievable. It employs a billion people. We should turn ourselves into a force, and call our elected representatives to account, and then look at maybe this political system that we have, isn't fit for purpose. I mean, everybody says it isn't. So maybe check out direct democracy in Switzerland, which is very interesting, and aim to devolve to that, and then we can get the world that we want.
You grew up in London. How did that, and you became an activist very early in your life. How was that decision that you decided to go and use your fashion to send a message?
Well, it was literally the fact that we were getting far more, an obscene amount of publicity, that if you get to a certain point as a fashion designer, and they sort of turn you into some kind of god, and it was a bit revolting, to be honest. And I thought, well, I mean, I've always been interested in nature. My grandmother was the first woman in England to get a science degree. She was a biologist in 1908, and so it's been kind of in the blood. Mm-hmm. And, I've always loved, everything. And I think it's when you have children. I mean, the good guys are the guys who are activists from when they're kids. Bad guys like me become activists, environmentalists once they have children. It's like, oh my God, everything could kill my baby, So that's hugely motivating. And then realizing that the fashion industry had given me a voice because of my kind of celebrity, and that I felt that I had a moral obligation to use it.
Do you think there's hope in the world, in the political
Well, if we move massively
atmosphere
fast, I mean, back to democracy now. I mean, I adore Alessandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's made a film on democracy now about the Green New Deal, her Green New Deal, which is brilliant. She's sort of set it in the future in 2045 when we've actually achieved the Green New Deal, and she traces it, how it happened, 2018, the Democrats
And can you explain the deal?
Yeah, well, her deal is that we divest from fossil fuels now, and that we make decent jobs. We go into renewable energy, which will create more jobs, and then we put back the environment, which creates jobs. We value teaching, and what's terrifying in America is, I think, is it 8% of your budget is spent on education and 40% on the military. You know, I mean, what kind of job is it just go out and, you know, get paid to kill people? You know, people shouldn't go into the army anymore. But, you know, the amount of jobs created, but the turnover from fossil fuels to renewable energy would be enormous. Putting the land back, just restoring the environment, you know, making things properly, growing food that's organic rather than with a sack of chemicals. I mean, we got Brexit coming up in England, and people, you know, talking about chlorinated American chicken because it looks like, you know, the right-wing party would do a deal with America and we'd be flooded with, I'm sorry, but you're terrifying food. There's 60 pesticides that are used in America that are banned in Europe. I mean, what the hell are they forcing you to eat? You know, it's... Yeah. Sorry, I've got a bit adrift on that one. Remind me of the question, but...
the New Deal. Okay,
the New Deal would work.
But
so
don't you
check the movie, because she shows how it works. It's a bit fluffy on technical detail, but we've got renewable energy. There's so much technology which is just sitting there waiting to be used. I mean, the fossil fuel companies were buying patents in the 70s and putting them in the bank. You've got your, you know, very interesting watching the news last night about Donald Trump. The word traitor, you know, is kind of interesting, and I think is getting to be really bandied about. And he is just like, you know, he's the brand of the fossil fuel companies. Get rid of him, you know, I think is essential, and move on to something which gives a chance, you know, future for life on Earth.
That is important to protect Earth, definitely.
Yeah, rather.
But don't you think that the millennials and the Generation Z, they are more conscious about Mother Nature? I mean,
super better educated.
I'm 48, and when I was growing up in Puerto Rico, we were not talking about that, at least not in Puerto Rico. But what I think is that people are becoming more conscious, and the younger generations, they have that ingrained already, that there's climate change, and we really need to...
Well, it's their future. They're the ones that have got the longest future to look forward to. I mean, I was just looking at a newspaper on the plane coming over yesterday, and it's saying the White House has actually cut research on the effects of climate change later in the century. They're just literally cancelling it out because it's so terrifying, and that's when these kids are going to be alive. You know, it's like from 2040, 20 onwards. Unless we do something now, it's a nightmare. We descend into hell, and we end up looking like Mars. Like, no thanks.
Yeah.
You know, hooray for young kids, but I'm also fed up with people saying, oh, the kids will fix it. Fuck that. We messed it up. We have to all do it together, even if we're, you know, 100-year-olds join in. I mean, in African societies, the oldest member of the society of the village was made to be the leader because they were known to have acquired the most knowledge. Let's use that knowledge.
And let's
do it now, and we do it together, and we've got to do it now.
That's why I believe the Knight Foundation, Miami-Dade College, by bringing these discussions in the Fashion Week is so important because the message is getting out. What is your advice for the people here who are starting to become part of this industry? What is your advice? Well,
of course, you've got to study like hell. You've got to be incredibly good at everything, and you've got to know everything about history of fashion and all the kind of technology, pattern cutting that goes with it. You know, inform yourself about dye stuffs, materials, where they come from. But, you know, we're not just, you know, okay, we're fashion professionals. Hopefully you get a nice job. It's a lot tougher now than it was when I started because we could be independent, whereas now mostly it's jobs working for big companies. But it's also, but I think the essential part is the only thing that changes politicians' behaviour is something that affects their ability, threatens their ability to get re-elected. So get on that and threaten like fuck, because we're not just fashion professionals, we're human beings, we're citizens of the planet, and we're voters, and we can get the world that we want, but it's not enough just sitting around doing pretty pictures of clothes and thinking, you know, okay, when's yellow going to come back in? You know, we've got to be involved in the bigger picture, or else there's not going to be one.
You are an activist against the sweatshops. Can you explain to our audience how is a sweatshop, so they have the idea of what people that works for the industry have to go through?
Well, you go like if you look at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. I mean, Bangladesh is a country where there's 3.5 million, mostly women, working in the clothing industry. Most of them are illiterate. They've come from the country. You have, situations they can't read. They can't count. They can be forced to work overtime. Like they can be forced to 18, 20-hour days virtually. And yet when it comes to payday, they don't even know how much money they're owed. They're exposed to sexual harassment. Places like China, trade unions are illegal. And then the factory's so badly built because Western brands are pouring into these countries because they can make so much money out of these clothes that are being made so cheaply that these women are hardly being paid at all. They put up these crap buildings that then fall on their heads and 1,800 people or whatever get killed. And people like Benetton still haven't paid their compensation. It's disgusting. I mean, inform yourselves, boycott, divest and sanction. BDS is an amazing weapon that, if you want to know that your clothes have been made by people that have been treated fairly, target the people with bad track records, demand that they can guarantee that the people who have been working for them have been paid a realistic living wage, because they talk about living wages, but half these living wages you can't survive on.
You cannot survive.
No, it's shit. It's just shit.
It's terrible. Let's
so we need to change it. But the law I'm talking about, if they were forced to only allow goods into our economic blocks that were made to same standards outside, we're talking about labour standards, we're talking about minimum wage, we're talking about paid holidays, we're talking about no enforced unpaid overtime, and we're talking about healthcare.
Do you have any questions?
And
we
freedom
have
association.
five. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I bet you guys have questions for Katharine before we end up the conversations.
Oh dear,
Okay.
sorry, must have been a bit boring. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for listening anyway.
What can we expect from you in the future?
Well, probably more of the same. Hopefully showing by example. My dream is to do, a pop-up which would go, all over the world, which is called, Safe Life on Earth, and just make clothes which are actually doing that, which are organic cotton, which are made sustainably, which are biodegradable, or which last forever, because we need clothes, the one thing that we do.
And we like clothes too.
And we like clothes. It's, it's how we tell the story about who we are, who we'd like to be, So clothes are never going to go away, but just to be able to make them in a way that saves life on Earth.
That is great. But as consumers, we do have a big responsibility.
Yeah,
We
can fix it, but we need to move fast.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.